They kicked me out at 18 saying, "Be grateful we fed you." So I gave them a taste they'll never forget. The little plastic chip in my pocket felt heavier than a block of lead. 1 year, 365 days of fighting a war inside my own head, and I was, for the first time in a long time, winning. The party wasn't for me, not really. It was for my husband, Mark, and for his family, to show them I was better, fixed, no longer the broken thing they had to whisper about. My mother-in-law, Carol, had insisted on hosting it at their cavernous house, a place filled with polished wood and the ghosts of passive-aggressive comments. She said it was to celebrate me, but her smile never quite reached her eyes. It was a performer's smile, one that assessed its audience for applause. Tonight, her audience was a living room full of extended family, and I was the main act. She glided through the room, a shark in a cashmere sweater, topping up wine glasses and accepting praise for her magnanimity, for taking me in when I was 18, a mess of grief and bad choices after my parents died, for feeding me, as she once so delicately put it. Mark squeezed my hand, his thumb rubbing circles on my knuckles. He was proud. His relief was a tangible thing, a warm presence beside me that almost made the cloying scent of Carol's potpourri bearable. My Uncle Dave, a retired detective with eyes that missed nothing, gave me a slow, approving nod from across the room. He was my only real family left, the one who had seen the worst of it and never stopped answering my calls. He was nursing a club soda, a silent show of solidarity. Everything felt fragile, like a soap bubble shimmering with promise but ready to pop at the slightest provocation, and the provocation, as always, arrived in the form of Carol, holding a thick manila envelope. "Everyone, if I could have your attention for just a moment," she announced, her voice cutting through the low hum of conversation. The room fell silent. She beamed at me, that same polished, empty smile. "We are all so incredibly proud of Clara for reaching this milestone. It's been a long, hard road." She paused for effect, letting the weight of my past struggles settle over the room. "And as she steps into this new, responsible chapter of her life, Mark and I feel it's time to formalize her independence." She slid a sheaf of papers from the envelope and held them out to me. Her eyes glittered with something that was not pride. It was triumph. I took the papers, my hand trembling slightly. The top page was a formal eviction notice, 30 days to vacate the small guest cottage on their property that Mark and I had called home for the past 3 years. Beneath it was a bill, meticulously itemized. Room and board, age 18-24. It listed everything from electricity to groceries, with a healthy dose of interest tacked on. The grand total was just over $60,000, a debt I was apparently expected to pay. The air in my lungs turned to ice. This wasn't a celebration, it was an ambush, a public shaming disguised as a coming-of-age ceremony. Mark snatched the papers from my hand. "Mom, what is this? What the hell is this?" His voice was a low growl. The party guests began to murmur, shifting uncomfortably. Carol's expression hardened, the mask of the gracious hostess slipping away to reveal the cold, hard face I knew so well. "It's called accountability, Mark. We've enabled her for long enough. We took her in, we fed her, we gave her a roof over her head when she had nothing. She's an adult now. It's time she paid her own way. Be grateful we didn't charge you for the emotional damages." That's when it happened. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, meant only for Mark and me, but in the dead silent room, it carried. "Besides," she hissed, a cruel smirk playing on her lips, "it's the least she can do after what she cost us. All those years of her little habit. Do you have any idea how much money I had to move around to cover her tracks? To keep your father from finding out how much was disappearing from the business accounts? I told him it was bad investments, market fluctuations." She patted my cheek, her touch cold and reptilian. "I was protecting you, dear. I've always been protecting you. I just had to make sure the numbers added up." It was quite the creative accounting challenge. A wave of dizziness washed over me. The room tilted. It wasn't just the eviction or the fake bill. It was the confession, delivered with such casual malice, the missing money. For years, Mark's father, a kind but fiscally obsessed man, had lamented these mysterious losses in his small construction company. Carol had always blamed the economy or a dishonest bookkeeper she'd had to fire, but all along she had pointed the finger at me in whispers, my addiction, my unreliability. She hadn't just let people believe I was a financial drain, she had actively manufactured the evidence, using me as a smokescreen for her own theft. She was gloating, confessing to years of embezzlement right here, in front of everyone, so convinced of my weakness that she believed her words would be dismissed as the ravings of a cornered addict. But she made two critical mistakes. The first was assuming that 1 year of sobriety had left me fragile. It hadn't. It had forged me in fire, leaving behind a core of cold, hard clarity. The second and far more significant mistake was that she had forgotten who else was in the room. She was so focused on her audience of enablers and on me, her designated victim, that she hadn't noticed my Uncle Dave push himself off the wall. He hadn't moved closer, but his posture had changed. He was no longer a guest at a party. He was a detective at a crime scene. His gaze was fixed on her, his expression unreadable but radiating an intensity that made the air crackle. He had heard every single word, and I knew, with a certainty that cut through the shock and the horror, that she had just handed me the weapon I would use to burn her world crumpled to the ground. My reaction wasn't what she expected. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. The swirling vortex of panic in my chest solidified into a single sharp point of rage. I looked from her smug face to the horrified expression on Mark's, then to the quiet, assessing stare of my uncle. I folded the papers neatly in half and tucked them into my purse. Then I looked Carol directly in the eye. "Thank you for clarifying," I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "I appreciate your honesty." The confusion on her face was immensely satisfying. She had expected a meltdown, a dramatic scene that would validate her narrative of me as the unstable, ungrateful charity case. She didn't get one. Uncle Dave moved then, a quiet and deliberate advance. He didn't address Carol directly. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "Clara, Mark, I think it's time we go." His voice was calm, but it held the unmistakable weight of authority. It was the voice he used to de-escalate domestic disputes and control unruly suspects. The party guests, sensing the shift, began to make their excuses, a quiet exodus of people desperate to escape the blast radius. Carol's face contorted with fury. She had lost control of the narrative. Running away? "See, Mark? This is what she does. She can't handle the truth." "Oh, I can handle the truth, Carol," I said, turning back to face her one last time. "The question is, can you?" I didn't wait for an answer. With Mark on one side and Uncle Dave on the other, I walked out of that house, leaving her standing alone in a room full of half-eaten appetizers and shattered illusions. The war was no longer just inside my head. It was out in the open now, and I had just been handed a declaration, a confession, and a damn good witness. The car ride was silent. Mark drove, his hands clenched white on the steering wheel. I stared out the window, the manicured lawns of his parents' neighborhood blurring into a green smear. My mind was racing, replaying Carol's words over and over. "Move money around. Cover her tracks. Keep your father from finding out." It was a meticulous, long-term campaign of gaslighting and fraud. Every time I'd relapsed, every time I'd been in a blackout, she'd seen an opportunity. She had woven my sickness into a cover story for her own greed. The shame I'd carried for years, the belief that I was a fundamental burden, a black hole of need and expense, she had manufactured it. She had nurtured it. She had used it to isolate me, to make me feel so worthless that I would never question her version of reality. We got back to the guest cottage, the place that was no longer a home but a holding cell with a 30-day lease. Uncle Dave came in with us, shutting the door firmly behind him. He looked at me, his expression a mixture of anger and deep sadness. "You okay, kid?" I shook my head, the adrenaline finally giving way to a bone-deep tremor. "No, but I will be." I pulled out the papers from my purse and spread them on the small kitchen table. The eviction notice, the fraudulent bill. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold them steady. "She confessed, Dave. She said it all out loud." "I know," he said, his voice grim. "I heard it. Every word. She got arrogant. Thought she had you pinned. Narcissists do that. They get so high on their own supply they forget to watch their backs." He pulled out his phone. "I have a friend, a lawyer. Not a bulldog, something better. A surgeon. Specializes in family law but has a background in forensic accounting. Her name is Anya Albright. I'm calling her now. We're going to meet with her first thing Monday morning." Mark finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "My own mother. She's been stealing from my dad for years and blaming you." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a dawning horror and a profound guilt. "Clara, I believed her. Not all of it, but parts. I thought you were just so lost in it all that you didn't realize how much you were costing us. I never imagined." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "How could you have?" I said, and to my own surprise, there was no accusation in my voice, only a vast, weary emptiness. "She's your mother, and I was an addict. I was the perfect scapegoat. I gave her everything she needed to build her story. The betrayal was suffocating, but right then, sitting at that table under the fluorescent kitchen light, the most powerful feeling was a strange, terrifying kind of liberation. The burden of that unspecific, all-encompassing guilt I'd been carrying was not mine. It had been placed on me, cloak of shame woven by someone else's hands, and now I could finally take it off. That weekend was a blur of frantic activity. We packed, not just clothes and books, but our entire lives. We were getting out of there, off her property, before the 30 days were up. Every moment spent in that cottage felt like breathing poisoned air. Uncle Dave helped, his steady presence a balm on our frayed nerves. He directed us with quiet efficiency, taping up boxes, hauling furniture. While we packed, I started the other, more important work. I sat at the table with a legal pad and began to write a timeline. I went back years, dredging up memories I had tried to bury. Every snide comment Carol had made about money. Every time she'd loaned me cash with a sigh of martyrdom. Every family gathering where she'd made a pointed joke about the cost of my existence. I wrote down the dates of my relapses, cross-referencing them with the bad investments my father-in-law, Frank, had complained about. A pattern began to emerge, ugly and undeniable. I also began compiling evidence. I went through years of text messages, saving every manipulative missive from Carol, the ones that started with, "I don't want to upset you, but," and ended with a demand disguised as a loving suggestion. The ones where she offered help that always came with strings. I found old emails, bank statements, anything and everything. It was a painful painful, gut-wrenching process. Each message was a small cut, a reminder of how thoroughly I had been deceived. But with each piece of evidence I saved to a secure folder on my laptop, I felt a little stronger. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was building a case. Monday morning, we met with Anya Albright. Her office was minimalist and modern, all glass and steel, with a view of the city that made you feel like you were on top of the world. She was sharp, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, with intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through you. She didn't offer platitudes or comforting noises. She listened, her focus absolute, as I laid out the story, my voice shaking at first, then growing stronger as I recounted the events of the party. Uncle Dave sat beside me, corroborating the confession he'd witnessed. When I finished, Anya leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her legal pad. She confessed to felony embezzlement in a room full of people, she said, a hint of professional admiration in her voice. The sheer audacity is impressive. The problem, of course, is that most of those people are her family and will likely close ranks. Your uncle is a credible witness, but it becomes he said, she said. The emotional abuse, the gaslighting, that's morally reprehensible, but it's difficult to litigate. The fraudulent bill she gave you is harassment, but the real case, the leverage, is the money, the embezzlement she so kindly told you about. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. Here's what we're going to do. First, we file for a temporary restraining order. Based on the eviction, the fraudulent bill, and the verbal harassment your uncle witnessed, we have a good chance of getting it. That creates a legal boundary. Second, I'm going to retain a forensic accountant, the best in the state. We're going to petition the court to get access to the financial records of Frank's business and their personal accounts for the last 10 years. She handed you the key, Clara. She told you where to look. We're going to look. What about Frank? Mark asked, his voice strained. My dad. This is going to destroy him. Your father is a victim here too, Mark, Anya said, her tone softening slightly. He has a right to know that his wife has been systematically stealing from him and his business. The truth is going to be painful, but living a lie is worse. Carol is counting on your desire to protect your father as a way to keep you silent. We can't let her use your love for him as another weapon against you. Leaving her office, I felt a flicker of hope for the first time. It wasn't just my word against hers anymore. We had a plan. We had a strategy. The restraining order was granted a few days later. A sheriff's deputy served Carol the papers at her front door. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. My phone began to ring off the hook. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people I hadn't spoken to in months were calling, not to offer support, but to attack. How could you do this to your mother? Mark's Aunt Sherry shrieked at him over the phone. After everything she's done for you, she's a mess. Absolutely devastated. You're tearing this family apart over some petty squabble. The texts I received were worse. They were a coordinated assault, clearly orchestrated by Carol. They called me a liar, an ungrateful junkie, a gold digger. They accused me of relapsing, of being paranoid and delusional. Carol was playing her greatest hits, using every vulnerability I had ever shown her against me. She was painting me as the aggressor, the unstable one who had finally snapped and was making wild accusations to hurt the woman who had only ever tried to help me. It was character assassination on a grand scale, and it was brutally effective. For a few days, I faltered. The sheer volume of their collective disbelief was a physical weight. The old, familiar shame crept back in. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was crazy. It was a late-night call with my AA sponsor, a woman named Maria, who pulled me back from the edge. I was crying, telling her I couldn't do it, that I should just disappear and let Carol win. Maria listened patiently, then said, Clara, what is the one thing an addict in recovery has that no one else can fully understand? I told her I didn't know. A PhD in spotting manipulation, she said. You have spent years lying to yourself and others. You know what it looks and sounds like from the inside out. You are the expert in the room. Trust your gut. They're loud because they're scared. You have the truth. It's quiet, but it's heavier. Her words were a lifeline. She was right. I knew the patterns of deceit because I had lived them. Carol's tactics were just a variation on a theme I understood intimately. I blocked the numbers of every relative who had contacted me with accusations. I deleted the hateful messages. I shut down the noise and focused on the signal, the quiet, methodical work Anya and her team were doing. The fight had entered a new phase. It was no longer a shouting match. It was a siege. The next move from Carol was more insidious. Her husband, Frank, called Mark. His voice was tired, broken. He pleaded with Mark to get me to drop the restraining order and the ridiculous legal action. He said Carol was a wreck, that she couldn't eat or sleep. Then came the offer. Your mother and I, we've talked, Frank said, his voice heavy with reluctance. We want to help you kids get on your feet. We'll give you $100,000 for a down payment on a house. No strings attached. All you have to do is stop this. Let's put it all behind us and be a family again. It was a bribe, wrapped in the language of reconciliation. $100,000 to buy my silence. $100,000 to let her get away with years of theft and psychological torture. Mark relayed the offer to me, his face grim. He doesn't know, Mark said. She's convinced him this is all some big misunderstanding, that you're having some kind of post-recovery breakdown, and that this money will calm me down. She's using him as a pawn. Tell him no, I said without a moment's hesitation. Tell him the truth isn't for sale. That night was my rock bottom in this new war. The temptation temptation wasn't the money, it was the escape. We could take the money, move away, and never have to see them again. The thought of avoiding the grueling legal battle, the depositions, the inevitable confrontation in court was seductive. I sat on the floor of our tiny new apartment, surrounded by boxes, and felt the immense weight of the fight ahead. For a fleeting, terrifying moment, the thought of a drink, of oblivion, flickered in my mind. It was the old escape hatch, the emergency exit I had sealed shut a year ago. I wanted out. I wanted the pain to stop. I didn't pick up a drink. I picked up the phone and called my therapist, Dr. Evans. I told her everything. The pressure, the family's attacks, the bribe, the flicker of temptation. She listened, her voice a calm anchor in my storm. "Clara," she said gently, "Carol's strategy is to make the cost of fighting her higher than the cost of surrendering. She is trying to exhaust you. This is the moment of greatest pressure, right before the dam breaks. Your sobriety is your superpower in this fight. It gives you the clarity she is trying so desperately to undermine. Feel the weight of it, acknowledge how hard it is, and then remind yourself why you started." I hung up the phone and looked at the timeline I had been building, the pages now filled with notes and dates. I was fighting for the 18-year-old girl who believed she was worthless. I was fighting for the woman who spent years drowning in a shame that wasn't hers. I was fighting for a future free from the poison of Carol's influence. The exhaustion remained, but beneath it, the resolve hardened. I would not break. The legal process was a slow, grinding machine. Months passed. Anya's team filed motions. Carol's lawyers filed counter motions, trying to block our access to the financial records. They painted me as a vindictive opportunist, citing my history of addiction as proof of my unreliability. They claimed I was trying to extort my loving, supportive in-laws. It was a war of paper, a slow, expensive battle of attrition. During this time, my world shrank. It was me, Mark, Uncle Dave, Anya, and my support network. Everyone else was on the other side of the wall. Mark's relationship with his father became strained to the breaking point. Frank couldn't reconcile the image of his loving wife with the monster we were describing. He was caught in the middle, a victim of them both, of Carol's deceit and of our pursuit of the truth that would shatter his world. He chose denial, siding with his wife and branding his own son as brainwashed and ungrateful. The loss of his father was a deep wound for Mark, a constant aching grief. Yet, he never wavered in his support for me. "We see this through," he'd say, holding my hand during the long, silent evening. Together. The breakthrough came on a gray Tuesday in October, nearly 8 months after the party. Anya called me. "We got it," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "The judge granted our final motion. We have full access to the business and personal accounts. The accountant is starting immediately." It felt like the first ray of sun after a long, dark winter. The waiting, however, was agonizing. Weeks crawled by. The forensic accountant, a man named Mr. Peterson, was a ghost, working silently through a decade of financial data. Then, the day before Thanksgiving, Anya called again. "Can you and Mark come to my office? Now?" We rushed downtown, my heart pounding in my chest. In the conference room, Anya and Mr. Peterson were waiting for us. Spread across the massive table were binders, spreadsheets, and flowcharts. Mr. Peterson, a mild-mannered man with spectacles and a neat mustache, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Miller," he began, addressing me, "your mother-in-law is not a sophisticated criminal. She's a brazen one. She relied on the fact that no one was looking. For 10 years, she has been systematically siphoning money from the business using a simple but effective method." He pointed to a chart. "She would over-invoice for materials from a specific supplier. The supplier would kick back the overage amount to a shell corporation. The name of that corporation?" He paused for effect. "CM Enterprises, her initials, Carol Miller." He continued. "The total amount is staggering, over $900,000. But here's where it gets interesting. The transfers from the supplier to her shell company often happened within days, sometimes hours, of significant cash withdrawals you made from your personal account during your periods of active addiction." He showed us another spreadsheet, 2 columns side by side. On the left, my ATM withdrawals, $100 here, $200 there. On the right, transfers of $50, $60, $70,000 into her secret account. She was creating a correlation, Anya explained. If Frank ever got suspicious and looked at the books, he would see money going out of the business at the same time his daughter-in-law was withdrawing cash. It was her insurance policy. She was building a narrative, a breadcrumb trail that led directly to you. But there was more. The accountant had found emails. Buried deep in the company's server archives were emails between Carol and the supplier, openly discussing the kickback scheme. And there was one email from Carol to her sister, Sherry, the one who had screamed at Mark on the phone. It was written a few years prior, after a particularly bad relapse of mine. "It's a blessing in disguise," Carol had written. "Frank is so distracted by Clara's drama that he hasn't looked at a balance sheet in months. Every time she messes up, I get another 6 months of breathing room. She's the best cover I've ever had." I stared at the words on the paper, printed in cold, black ink. She's the best cover I've ever had. All my pain, my sickness, my deepest moments of shame, to her, they were just a tool, a convenience, a blessing in disguise. A wave of nausea rolled over me. Mark put his arm around me, his body rigid with a silent, consuming rage. This was it, the irrefutable proof, the smoking gun. It wasn't just my word against hers anymore. It was her own words, her own accounts, her own meticulously documented deceit. Anya laid out the strategy. We could go to the district attorney with this. It's criminal fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. She would likely face prison time. Or, she said, her eyes sharp, we can use this as leverage for a civil settlement that gives you everything you want and more. If we go the criminal route, it could take years, and the outcome is never certain. In a civil case, with this evidence, she has no defense. We can force her to confess to Frank. We can ensure she repays every cent. We can get a permanent restraining order and a public apology. We can control the outcome. We talked for a long time. The thought of seeing Carol in prison was deeply satisfying. But Anya was right. A criminal trial would be a circus. It would drag Frank through a public humiliation. A civil action was cleaner, faster, and gave us more control. We wanted justice, but we also wanted peace. We wanted to close this chapter and start our new life. We'll go the civil route, I said, my voice firm, but on one condition. I want to face her. I want to be in the room when she is confronted with this. I want to see her face when she realizes she has nowhere left to hide. Anya nodded. That can be arranged. The next step was a formal mediation. It was a strategic choice. It wasn't a court of law, but a conference room where both parties and their lawyers would meet to try and reach a settlement. It was less formal, but the presence of a neutral mediator, usually a retired judge, gave it weight. Carol and her lawyer agreed, likely assuming they could bully me into submission and a small settlement. They had no idea what we were about to unload. The day of the mediation was cold and rainy. The conference room was sterile and impersonal, dominated by a long, polished table. I felt a tremor of anxiety, a familiar ghost of fear. I took a deep breath and focused on a grounding technique my therapist had taught me. Feel my feet on the floor, the solid chair beneath me. I was here. I was sober. I was safe. Mark sat beside me, a silent, solid presence. Anya was on my other side, her briefcase full of righteous thunder. Carol swept in with her lawyer and Frank, who looked gaunt and exhausted. She didn't look at me. She sat down opposite us, arranging her papers with an air of bored indignation, as if this were all a tedious inconvenience. She was still performing, still playing the role of the wronged matriarch. The mediator began with the standard opening remarks. Then Carol's lawyer spoke, launching into a long, patronizing speech about my history of instability and this unfortunate cry for attention. He proposed a nuisance settlement of $20,000, contingent on me signing a non-disclosure agreement and issuing a public apology to Carol for the distress I had caused her. I almost laughed. Anya let him finish, her expression perfectly neutral. When he was done, she didn't respond to his points. She simply opened her briefcase and took out a thick binder, placing it on the table with a solid thud. She slid a copy across to Carol's lawyer. Before we discuss my client's response, Anya said, her voice calm and level, I'd like you to turn to Exhibit A. The binder contained everything. The report from the forensic accountant, the flowcharts showing the money moving from the supplier to CM Enterprises, the bank statements from the Shell Corporation, and on the very last page, a printed copy of the email. She's the best cover I've ever had. I watched Carol's face as her lawyer silently flipped through the pages. Her mask of composure began to crack. A flicker of confusion, then dawning comprehension, then pure, undiluted panic. Her skin went pale, a sickly, waxy color. She looked at her lawyer, who refused to meet her gaze. His own face a mask of professional shock. He knew the game was over. But it was Frank I was watching most closely. Mark had slid a third copy of the binder in front of his father. Frank stared at the cover for a long moment before opening it. He read slowly, his brow furrowed. I saw his hands begin to shake as he traced the lines on the flowchart with his finger. I saw the moment he understood. It wasn't a dramatic outburst. It was a quiet deflation, as if the air had been let out of him. He visibly sagged in his chair, the weight of his wife's decade-long betrayal crushing him all at once. He looked up from the pages, not at me, but at Carol. His expression was one of hollow, bottomless disillusionment. The woman he had loved and trusted for 40 years was a stranger, a thief who had used their family's darkest moments for her own profit. Carol, he whispered, his voice barely audible. What is this? She tried to rally, to bluff her way out. It's lies, Frank. It's all fabricated. That girl, she pointed a trembling finger at me, is a vindictive little witch. She's twisting things. Anya spoke again, her voice cutting through Carol's frantic denials. Turn to Exhibit B, counsel. She slid another document across the table. It was a sworn affidavit from the supplier, who, when faced with federal fraud charges, had agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for immunity. He confirmed the entire kickback scheme, every date, every transfer. He confirmed it was all Carol's idea. The room was silent. The only sound was the faint rustle of paper as Carol's lawyer closed the binder. He looked at his client, then at Anya. We need a moment to confer with our client, he said, his voice flat. They left the room. Through the glass wall of the conference room, we could see them in the hallway. Carol was gesticulating wildly, her face a mask of fury and desperation. Frank stood apart from them, his back against the wall, staring at the floor. He didn't say a word to her. He didn't even look at her. When they returned 20 minutes later, the fight was gone from her. She looked small and shrunken, her eyes red-rimmed and darting around the room, unable to land on any of us. Her lawyer did all the talking. My client is prepared to meet your terms, he said, his voice clipped. Anya laid them out, one by one. Full repayment of the $947,000 to Frank's business, with interest, a separate settlement to me for emotional distress and damages, the amount to be determined, the signing over of the guest cottage to Mark and me, free and clear, a permanent legally binding restraining order stipulating no contact of any kind, direct or indirect, and finally, a written confession and apology to be read aloud by Carol here in this room. Her lawyer balked at the last point. That's unnecessary humiliation. It's non-negotiable, Anya stated, her voice like ice. There was another tense conference in the hallway. When they came back, Carol agreed. She sat, trembling, and read the statement her lawyer had hastily drafted. It was a stilted, legalistic confession, devoid of any real remorse, but it was enough. Hearing her voice, forced to speak the words, to admit her theft, her deceit, her manipulation, it was the validation I needed. It was the sound of my truth finally being spoken, not by me, but by the one who had tried so hard to silence it. When she finished, she finally looked at me. Her eyes were filled with a venomous, bottomless hatred. In that moment, I felt nothing but a strange, distant pity for her. Her entire world, built on a foundation of lies, had just crumbled to dust, and she had no one to blame but herself. We signed the papers. It was over. We walked out of that building into the clean, rain-washed air, and for the first time in a year, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't a triumphant, movie-ending moment. It was quiet, somber. Justice, I was learning, wasn't about victory parades. It was about the quiet return of peace. It was about the end of a war. The aftermath was messy, as real life always is. Frank filed for divorce. The family was irrevocably fractured, split into factions. We sold the guest cottage immediately, wanting no ties to that property, to that life. We used the money from the sale and the settlement to buy a small house of our own on the other side of town. It was modest, but it was ours. Every nail we hammered, every wall we painted, felt like an act of reclamation. I continued with my therapy, learning to process the complex trauma. Some days were good. Some days, a stray comment or a bad memory would send me spiraling back into the darkness. Recovery, I learned, isn't a straight line. It's a dance, a clumsy back and forth between healing and hurting. My sobriety became my anchor, the one non-negotiable constant in my life. The fight with Carol had nearly cost me everything, but in a strange way, it had also solidified my resolve. I had faced the worst the world could throw at me while sober, and I had survived. I had won. Mark and I had to rebuild our relationship from the ground up. The betrayal had left scars on him, too. The guilt of his own blindness, the grief of losing his family. But we learned to talk, to really listen. We built a new foundation, one based not on shared history, but on a shared commitment to a brutal, beautiful honesty. I never saw Carol again. The restraining order ensured that. Sometimes I would hear things through the grapevine, that she had moved to another state, that she was living a smaller, quieter life. I tried not to think about her. Forgiving her was a mountain I wasn't ready to climb, and maybe never would be. But I could accept it. I could let it go. Her punishment was to live with herself, to be trapped in the prison of her own bitter, narcissistic mind. My freedom was living without her. Today marks 3 years. 3 years since that disastrous party. 3 years of sobriety. 3 years of peace. I'm sitting here in the backyard of my own home. Mark is inside making dinner. My Uncle Dave is coming over later. The little plastic chip in my pocket is for 2 years. I never did get to properly celebrate my 1-year milestone. It got interrupted, but tonight we'll celebrate. Not just the sobriety, but everything that came after. The fight, the survival, the quiet, hard-won life we've built from the ashes. The scars are still there. They always will be. They are a part of my story, a map of where I've been. But they no longer define me. They are a reminder that I was wounded, yes, but I healed. I survived. I am free. Carol said I should be grateful that she fed me, and in a way, I am. She fed me a taste of betrayal so profound, so absolute, that it forced me to find a strength I never knew I had. She meant to destroy me, but instead, she set me on the path to save myself, and that's a taste I'll never forget. So that's the story. All of it. The whole sordid, exhausting, ridiculously long saga. If you're still listening to this, you deserve a medal, or at least a very comfortable chair and a strong beverage of your choice. I mean, seriously, who has this kind of time? You must have the patience of a saint or be putting off doing some serious laundry. Either way, I salute you. Your dedication is noted and deeply appreciated. Maybe you could channel some of that focus into, I don't know, hitting the subscribe button? Just a thought. Go on, give it a click. It's way less complicated than suing your mother-in-law for embezzlement, I promise.